Knowing this near universal pattern helps to assess new brands and existing ones.
What don't marketers know?
Quite a lot. Marketers largely live in an anything-goes world where the latest fashion or fad drives an awful lot of practice.
Segmentation is the recognition you can't serve everyone with equal satisfaction.
This is the Zac Anesbury Show.
Welcome. On today's podcast, we have Professor Billy Sung. Billy is Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at Curtin University, Perth, Australia. In this episode, Billy shares with us some of the secrets to his success, one that you and I, as mere mortals, should try to emulate. Now, that is building a team around him that is capable and one that he empowers and enables. We talk about his experience as being a member of the largest marketing committee in all of Australia and New Zealand and the value of being an adjunct for a university. Billy then takes us through one of his most recent publications about voice assistants, think Siri, and he gives us some valuable insights and behind-the-scenes knowledge about that research. At the end of the episode, he has not just one, but two book recommendations for you and provides some insights for you up-and-coming marketers. So without further ado, Billy Sung. Awesome. Billy, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your day today to speak to all of us about yourself, your wealth of marketing education and knowledge. We very much appreciate you having here. Did you want to provide us with a little bit of an overview as to who you are?
Sure, Zac, and thank you for inviting me onto your platform and to share some of my experience and some of my research. So just a little bit about myself. I'm a professor of consumer psychology and neuroscience at Curtin University, based in Perth. And basically, I specialize in consumer biometrics and neuroscience research. What that means is basically I use biometric measurements like eye tracking, facial expression, skin inductance, heart rates, brainwave, so on and so forth to better understand consumers and how they make decisions. And one of the things that I actually do at Curtin University is to lead a consumer research lab. So this is a research team that really does a lot of industry consulting, and we call it demand-driven research, but basically industry research to actually optimize marketing assets. So a lot of the television commercials, some of the out-of-home ads that you might see around Australia, even some in Singapore and Hong Kong, some of them are actually tested by us in the consumer research lab at Curtin University.
Very cool. And I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of that and more, which I can't wait because, the more I look into you, Billy, the more I find out and the more it's all pretty exciting. But I'd like to just take you back to perhaps when you were younger. I don't know, you might have been a young man or during primary school, high school. When did you think, I want to enter sort of psychology, probably from what I can tell, or maybe the marketing field as a whole? Do you remember having like an aha moment or a series of events or something like that?
That's a good question. So, and it takes me back a long, long while. So I guess different to a lot of marketing academics, I'm actually not a trained marketer. I would say I'm more a psychologist. So my training, my bachelor's, my honors, and my postgrad and PhDs are all in psychology. In fact, more so in neuropsychology, neuroscience, and decision making, and those type of psychological field. Now, I guess casting my mind back when I was really young and how I decided to be a psychologist or at least study psychology is probably when I saw a drama called Lie to Me. I'm not sure if you remember that drama. It's basically based on Ekman's face model theory. So basically, Lie to Me is kind of like a US drama that actually shows how this really expert in reading facial expression that has a consultancies that actually tells when people lie. So, they'll be solving, murder cases, helping US government to disband terrorist group and all these different, drama. Now, when I was really young, I didn't have a psychology, training, saw the drama and go, that is so interesting. And that is so cool. And so I was like, oh, I really want to be him. I want to be able to tell whether people are lying or telling the truth. based on, minute facial expression, and you can actually classify facial expression in an instance, right? But obviously, as you delve into the literature, you kind of know that actually, that facial coding that is done manually is probably not that accurate and not that valid. And so it kind of, during my career, I had an epiphany and kind of go, okay, well, what else? And so that's why we jumped into biometrics. But I think that's how we started off with psychology. And then I guess what I did was I did a bachelor in psychological science. What's interesting is that, look, I'm an Asian, so I have typical Asian parents. If you tell them, I want to be a policeman, doing forensic psychology, they'll go, I have no idea what that is. But if you say, I'm going to be a psychologist, like a clinical psychologist, they'll be, oh yeah, that's professional, right? They're doctors, right? So they're okay with it. So I went with Bachelor of Psych Science in honors, and very soon I realized that in a psychology bachelor, it doesn't guarantee you to have even further training that you require to be a counselor or a clinical psychologist. And to be honest, I actually found out why I was interested in that whole idea about reading facial expression, because what's something that I lack personally is that I actually have no empathy. So
really? Oh, wow. I won't come to you if I'm in times of need.
Exactly. I think if you ask my wife right now, she'll definitely agree with you. Like, I am the most robotic person you can probably find in the whole world, because if jokes aside, I mean from a joking perspective, if I always tell my student this, like when my students say, I don't understand this, and I'll explain it. So I still don't understand it. I'll go, I really don't understand why you don't understand it. I literally explained it to you. No empathy at all. And so obviously, as you probably know, a clinical psychologist requires quite a great amount of empathy to do the job. Even to do a reasonable job, you have to have a certain level of empathy. And so from, I think, third year or when we have to decide, what honors project we're going to go into. So honors is basically a research project that you do in bachelor, a whole 1 year long program that's focused on research. I said, look, I'm really not cut out for clinical psychology. And so I needed to find something else to do. And so I fall into perception psychology and neuropsychology. What's interesting is I was actually trained in a more of a perception lab. So looking at, really basic, how people perceive certain things. So how do people perceive faces and all those kind of things. So perception, really hardcore basic psychology where, you might have doing experiment where the oddball paradigm where two balls collide, and when they collide, there's a sound. So when there's a sound, you normally see that as two ball bouncing each other. If you don't hear the sound, you actually see the ball crossing each other, but objectively, they're the same. So kind of like, why is that the case? How does the brain interpret those perception? And looking at more neuropsychological kind of theories, so on and so forth. And I got interested in not actually the hardcore science, but actually going back and going, wait a minute, that really reminds me of facial expression. And as we learn, facial expression, yes, it might have validity, but you can't really manually code them. It's very hard to manually code them. They're minute, milliseconds kind of responses. And so you probably need electrical responses and, AI, computer vision to actually do it. And so actually at that point, that's when the boom of biometric coming in. So there is computer science, AI, and, all these electrical sensor equipment that are becoming cheap. And so I was thinking, we can actually do something here. And one of the things that I always say is, then I read this article about how you can use fMRI to look at how brain actually value products. So if I give you two option A should be, how much do you perceive this to be of value, and how much do you perceive this as of value, and that decide what you pick. And I go, that's interesting. I wonder if we could apply biometrics into consumer. And I start reading consumer behavior marketing literature, and I go, there's really not much. And so that's how I kind of fall into the whole marketing and business discipline. I'm sorry for the long-winded story.
No, that's really cool.
How I got into psychology and marketing.
Yeah, so it started off simply by you watched a TV show as a child and you thought, this is really cool. Yeah, isn't it funny how life kind of has those like little moments?
Yes.
You know, if your parents were not busy at that time, or you didn't, you know, sneak in a bit of TV or whatever it happened to be, your life could have turned out quite different. That's really cool. So you mentioned there that you did your undergraduate degree. So you did that at the University of Queensland?
That's right.
Yeah. So very prestigious university. Sort of anyone who's not in Australia, that's kind of the northeast part of our country. And the University of Queensland is located, is your campus in Brisbane there in the actual centre? Or
Brisbane, yes.
Cool. That sounds good. So did you grow up in Queensland? Is that how you ended up there?
Yeah, so my family immigrated to Australia when I was about 10 or 11. So to be honest, I have grown up in Australia, so mostly in Brisbane. So I think I've spent, a good 20 years in Brisbane before moving away for Sydney for 6 months, Melbourne, I think for about 4 or 5 months. And then finally, when I finished my PhD, I went to Perth. So I think this year, well, at the end of this year, it will be the 8th year in Perth.
Yeah, and I don't know, I feel like Australia has like a overarching culture, but there's definitely different subcultures within each one of these capital cities. So that must have been a pretty cool life experience moving all around.
Yes.
So your bachelor's degree, sort of 3-year program, then you moved into honours. Was honours like an exclusive thing to get into? Was it like, Billy has, GPA of, whatever it happened to be, and then we'll invite him? Or how did you sort of opt into that one?
Yes. So in Australia, most universities, I think the honours degree in pretty much most discipline has basically you need to be in a certain average GPA, and I think when I did it in my time, it was I think an average GPA of 80 to get into an honours program, and basically it's the 4th year of your bachelor degree that you can opt in to do honours. You can also do a 4th year in psychology that is fully coursework, and we call it the PASS stream. So basically, it's the 4th year of coursework in psychology. But for honours, it's the 4th year where you actually do half of your year on a coursework. So you do a lot of research-related, coursework, and then the other half of the year or the other semester, you actually work on a intense research project with your assigned supervisor. But normally, what happens is the honours supervisor will want to work with you at the start of the year because it's really difficult to get ethics and get all the research and get all the analysis and write up the thesis in just, under 4 months, which is essentially a semester.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that. So we had the exact same difficulty. So I was the second to last cohort who did honours degrees at UniSA. We try to transition people straight to a master's by research now. And it was pretty much for that exact same reason. At the time, ethics approval took far too long. That's all been really streamlined now. We have a much better process. But yeah, it was about that data collection, getting ethics, knowing the literature enough to actually contribute significantly. So that's one of the reasons we don't have it anymore. But yeah, we also had coursework as well, which was similar to you. So it seems like the programs are very similar, and we experienced something quite, obviously I didn't do it in psych, but that's really interesting because I don't meet too many other people who have done honours, it's nice to meet someone else. So you, I'm guessing then, because you then did your PhD there as well, I'm guessing you must have got like a first class honours then, and then that allowed you to skip like not a traditional, but the alternative route of doing like a master's by research, right?
That's right. So generally, to qualify for a PhD, I think even in Australia right now, most university requires you to demonstrate that you have completed a degree that has at least 25% research related coursework or program. That certainly is the case at Curtin right now, because I just got through a case to actually assess them. And basically, as you can see, 4-year bachelor program, 1 year is honours. So literally you can claim that that 1 year is the 25% of the research related. Now for PhD, as you know, you need not only that requirement, but also you need to demonstrate substantial research capability. And so generally it's a first class honors or second class. So first class honors is pretty much a must for a PhD in some sense, or a PhD scholarship. Second class is you may or may not get enrolled into. And if you do get something like a second class or you don't get an honors, then what happens is we have to go through another route or another entry pathway, which could be a master or like a clinical master if it's in psychology. It could be a practical master. It could be even a MPhil or master by research, as you said.
Yeah, gotcha. Just out of curiosity, did you ever publish your research from your honors?
That is a very good question. So since my honors supervisor is a psychologist, I would assume that he probably wouldn't hear this podcast. No, so it's interesting. So if I say this, you would probably go, what? So we actually did 5 studies in my honors.
Yeah, that is a what moment. Yeah.
But the 5 study is perception psychology. So they are like the sample size is like 20 to 30 each study. So it's a very easy, normally A/B testing, sometimes factorial design, kind of experimental design. But basically, my honors supervisor, which I totally respect and really admired, Jason Tangin, he's a very, very talented cognitive scientist and forensic psychology researcher. And so we actually did the 5 study on a face illusion. So long ago that I don't even probably remember that. I think it's called the face distorted effect, so FFDE, and so a fast face distortion effect. So basically, when you flash sequentially faces at people, so if you're on a screen and I show you a face and they're aligned, and they're different faces, what happens is if I flash them really quickly to you, you'll start to see the face deform. And basically, that's quite interesting because you would say that, okay, well, I perceive the world as an objective world, right? But objectively, the faces are not distorted. But if I flash these normal faces in a speed, you will start to actually, your perception of the face actually start to be deformed. So you actually see, a big nose with small eyes and, wide jaw, so on and so forth, which is quite interesting. So we actually, they actually found the effect through another honors student before me, just randomly, because they were actually lining up faces for a forensic psychology study. And because of that, he has to click next, and then a face will flash up, and then he'll fixate on the face to actually align the face, facial structure, click next, and then the next face comes up and they have to align the pictures, so on and so forth. What's interesting is that they found that when that happens, that's where the fast flash face distortion effect comes up. So for my honors, they wanted to characterize it. So they want to find the boundary condition. So when does it happen? When does it not happen? So we actually conducted a series of 5 studies to do that, and also to look at what is the psychological mechanism on it. So basically, we were able to attribute it, I guess, wouldn't say confidently, but at least some descriptive evidence to show that it is actually what we call a shape contrast effect. So it will have the same effect if you flash shapes. So if I flash a square and then flash a circle right after it, and then a square and a circle, what happens is the square will start to look like a circle. The circle will look like a square, but objectively they are square and circles. So we actually were able to find some descriptive evidence to show that, yes, the flash face distortion effect is really just another typical shape contrast effect. Now, you can see how technical perception psychology can be, but in some sense in perception psychology, it's actually quite interesting, because that means that we actually use shape perception to actually understand face perception, which a lot of researchers in face perception will discredit, because they will say, no, face is a totally new category of object. And so we have a different area or different brain area and brain mechanism to interpret them and to process them. Our study actually showed that's not the case. Mm-hmm. Now, why wasn't it published? So my supervisor is a very, very rigorous scientist. So he accepted the fact that, yes, we found all the boundary effect and found distribution. Great. But we weren't able to find the most robust and replicable findings for the psychological mechanism. So although we have a significant result, it wasn't a very significant result. And if we extrapolate it and we do some power analysis, he said, let's replicate it. And when we replicate it with well, in some sense, that honors project at the last study was a bit overpowered. And there was only, I think, 50, so already overpowered. So you can see how big the effect size is. So he said, well, we need to underpower it. So we need to make it less. So, but then we found that it becomes not significant. And so he's like, no, we're not publishing this. What's interesting is, I think 5 years ago, I came back to him and I said, hey, Jason, do you remember me? Like from, well, that was at the time, that 5 years ago. So when I did my honors, it was another 5 years ago. So I said 5 years ago, do you want to publish this paper? Because, even if we don't publish the last study, let's just publish the fourth study. And he was really against it. He was like, no. We can't just not publish one study and publish the other four. And so, no, I guess the long answer is no, we haven't published the paper on flash phase distortion effect, and that's the reason. And I respect that. I actually learned a lot from him, and a lot of research integrity and respect for research from him. And that is exactly the attitude that I carry with my research and with my lab that I run right now. So make sure everything is replicable. If it's not replicable, we retract the paper. Most of my papers, you will see that there is multiple studies that really replicate the main effects. We don't analyze the data before it is fully collected. The only thing that I haven't caught on to is the pre-registering studies, which is sometimes it's quite a pain in the backside in some sense. Like there's so much administrative process in the university already. Don't add another layer on my research.
Yeah, I think a huge amount of credit goes to you, and I guess your honor supervisor as well, that you do have such high research integrity, because you do see, not as often as you would think, but you'd see papers that are retracted because it's found out that the researcher maybe hit a few respondents that then changed their results for being not significant to significant. Or cherry picked some of the data, or like you said, maybe have hidden a study or something like that. So I think it's a huge credit to you and your team and your research ethics that you actually do sort of keep doing that. So I don't know if you've read much of my research. I've read some of yours. We do something similar in terms of we try to replicate something as much as possible. And then we'll show that it hasn't just occurred for like one brand or one category in one country, but it's occurring over and over and over and over again. And that's kind of what we see as a bit of we have enough confidence in it to sort of share it with the rest of the world. So yours is kind of like those built-in studies building on it. Ours is like one big study, but analyzing as much as we can in that study. So yes. I think we have the same end goal, but come at it from a different approach.
Yes. And I also, I have actually, Zac, I have actually read a number of your research and the amount of data. Like, I really like how you and I guess your research team and also your research institution has access to, really big data. Is that actually it's real world data, right? And so you also have to one step ahead because you have the external validity. So you have the ecological validity, whereas yes, you can replicate a finding once or twice, and that's internal validity. But you guys actually have the external and ecological validity within it as well. So yeah, so kudos to you guys as well.
Well, you flatter me that you've read my papers. So you did your PhD at University of Queensland. It seems to be, so you started in 12, you finished in 16, and that could just be when you started during the year or whatever. Does that mean that your PhD had some sort of coursework component in it at the University of Queensland, or?
No, so in University of Queensland and most Australian university, PhD doesn't really require coursework unless, when you're enrolled, your supervisor can say that, Billy needs to do a quantitative research unit in postgraduate level just for a condition to pass. We call it milestone 1, which we'll probably discuss later on. Basically, it's kind of like a confirmation that you're ready to do a PhD. But in some sense, no. So why that is the case is because I actually took 3.5 years, 3 years and 4 months, I think. And basically, it's when I started and when I finished, which was a bummer because that actually reminds me that, in Australia, we have the Australian Research Council, which offer fellowship, 5-year fellowship for, we call it DECRA. So I forgot what it's called, Discovery Early Career Research Fellowship Scheme, I think. And so I actually finished my PhD in February, but they counted me that I finished because there's this cutoff point. So basically, they think that I finished my PhD in February 2016, but they counted me always that I finished in 2015. And so I literally, when I finish my PhD, I have, and DECRA and these type of fellowship schemes, Zach, they have kind of like a period, like after you finish your PhD, 5 years. And because of that cutoff date, as soon as I got conferral, that means I already lost 1 year to apply for the fellowship. That my check, like they just assume that, you just missed the cutoff date. And the cutoff date was literally 3 days.
Oh, no.
So I actually went to my DVCI at Curtin when I was trying to apply for DECRA, and I said, "Can you write me an exception letter?" He's like, "No." And I go, "Why?"
I think you got ripped off there because I think it should be your confirmation date. Yeah, because that's when the university certifies everything that you've done.
Because
that's really unlucky.
My thesis assessment also took not a lot, but a while longer than used to be. So normally it's about 3 months where you get the examination score. Well, the examiner needs to assess the thesis, you get the score, and then you have to revise it, and then the chairperson have to sign off to say, "Yep, Billy have meet every single criteria." Normally that takes 3 to 4 months in the Australian university. My recollection was it took about six to 7 months because the thesis examiner was I think one of them was on leave or something.
See, that's really unfair. If only they took 3 less days of leave, you'd be okay.
Yes. or our graduate research school in University of Queensland to speed up that administrative process from 3 days, I would have been okay.
All right. I think the worst I've ever heard in terms of examination times was, I think they've gotten a lot better because I think the community is better at supporting each other now. But one of them was one of my colleagues. Their PhD thesis was under review or examination for, I think it was like 10 months or a year or something. And they kept sending like follow-up emails. What's going on? Turns out they were in prison.
Oh my God. Wow.
Eventually someone alerted them to the fact that you are never getting this examination. You might want to find someone else.
My God.
Like, what are the odds, right? We'll discuss off air what they were there for. So your PhD thesis was in psychology and marketing, or mostly psych, or had a marketing bent to it, or like, how did you, because there's obviously links between psychology and marketing, but I'm just trying to see the connection for you.
So it's interesting. So from honest, I did a very, I always call it hardcore precision psychology, because why is that the case is because even like things that I use nowadays, like technology, like eye tracking, in precision psychology, to make it really experimental and consistent, you need a chin rest. So literally you do a 1.5 hour of experiment of a participant putting their head in a chin rest, and how comfortable can they be, right? So from that, I go, to be honest, I really like research. And it is really my honest supervisor, Jason, who really inspired me to be a researcher. Because I actually think I really enjoy the thinking process, the research formulation process, and the research hypothesis formulation process, and finally getting the answer. So, and really finding the true answer to that question. And it really fascinated me at that time. And in fact, I don't know if I've told you, Zac, I actually got an offer to do a clinical psychology master coursework interview. So getting in is very, very hard. Getting an interview for that coursework is extremely hard. I literally called the postgraduate coordinator and said, "Oh, sorry, I'm actually deciding to do a PhD and I'm not going to the interview." And literally the coordinator, because they know she knows me through honors, she's like, "Are you crazy? You know how hard it is to get in? Like we get normally 1,000 application and we shortlist about 80, and you're one of the 80." Like, "No, I'm not doing the interview." She was like, "You're crazy. Like most people would just drop PhD if they have a clinical psychology master." So anyway, basically, I don't want to be in clinical psychology. I don't want to be in, hardcore precision psychologist, but I was still very interested in psychophysiological response, biometrics, and this type of, objective measurement. So I started reading a few things, and I started to look at a field called social neuroscience, or social psychology and neuroscience. Basically using neuroscience techniques, so brain imaging, what I have said, eye tracking, facial expression, skin conductance, heart rate, to understand social psychology phenomena. So, and lo and behold, my PhD supervisor, Eric Famin, was actually one of the pioneers to use it on implicit bias. So basically, implicit racial bias. So seminal research in those literature would be something like, they would do it on, U.S. citizen or U.S. policemen, and on self-reported measure or surveys, they would say, no, I'm not racist to a particular culture. But when you flash photos of certain ethnicity versus other ethnicity, what you could actually see from the physiological response is that you can really see that we call it the zygomatic and corrugator muscle, so the smiling muscle and the frowning muscle. So that really stipulate or in some sense correlates with positive and negative affects. So, or positive and negative attitudes, because basically it's your brain preparing your smiling and frowning muscle to prepare to smile or frown. And so when you flash those pictures on and you use this physiological response to look at positive and negative attitude or positive and negative affect, you actually see a racial or implicit racial bias. And so that got me interested, because I read one of Eric's paper, I read some social psychology paper, and I go, this is interesting. Because that then reminded me about Lie to Me. I go, now I know that, yes, Lie to Me is not true like any other drama about any other profession, right? A drama about medical doctor will probably have medical doctor going, that is not how we do surgery, or that is not how we treat someone in emergency, right? It's the same as me nowadays when I rewatch Lie to Me, I'm like, yeah, nah, that's BS. Like you cannot. Like that facial coding is not even valid. Like there's so many other explanations because of that facial expression. But this is electrical response. These are brain responses that have been sent to your muscles. So heart rate, skin conductance, you can't fake these. And you can actually pick them up with biometrics. So I got really interested, started speaking to Eric. Eric was a very generous supervisor, I must say. He goes, what? You want to do it in consumer? I don't do consumer research. I know nothing about consumer. I'm not interested in consumer. Like, I don't want to make money. I don't care how much people buy. And I said, no, I really want to learn. So can you be my supervisor to teach me social neuropsychology or social neuroscience? And I'll get a supervisor from business school, which is my marketing supervisor, Nicole Hartley. Still, both of them are still in University of Queensland. And a good shout out to Eric, who's got recently promoted to a professor. And so basically, Eric was the technical social neuropsychology guy. Nicole was my marketing and consumer research guy, lady. And so they came together to supervise me, and I basically did a research on how emotion affects, certain emotion affects consumer decision-making process. And within it, there was a lot of components of these neuropsychological or psychophysiological measurements, like eye tracking, skin conductance, heart rate, and all those kind of things. And that kind of propelled me in a career for the past 7 to 8 years to become a researcher that specializes in now I call consumer neuroscience or neuromarketing and these type of disciplines.
Yeah, it's a really cool way that you've kind of brought people from two different aspects of the university, both have very different but complementary skills, and you've managed to create a PhD out of it. And I guess a career out of it when you think about it. That's rather cool. So with your PhD, was it like a traditional kind of thesis, or did you go down like a publication by thesis route, or like, I'm just trying to figure out what you've done there.
Yeah, so I actually did I guess what we currently call in most Australian universities, a hybrid PhD thesis.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like by publication, but strictly speaking, most universities now call by publication when you have already published a paper. But a hybrid mode is a less stringent kind of one where you actually have a general introduction chapter and then possibly 2 to 3 papers or chapters that are written with the intention to submit to a journal. So they're written in journal formats instead of chapter or thesis chapter format. So in each of these papers, they would have its own general introduction, lit review, hypothesis development, method, results, so on, discussion, so on and so forth. And so you have 3 of those chapters. And then at the end, you have a kind of like a general discussion and conclusion. Some people opt in for a hybrid mode to also have a general methodology to kind of preempt what the methodology that they're using in. So I actually followed that because, to be honest, I still carry this attitude to date. And it was something that my supervisor or Eric has told me, look, when you're doing a PhD thesis, yes, if you write a traditional thesis, it's like 500 page, but who will read it, right? It will just sit in the library and you're the only one, and probably your parent will read the first 30 page, maybe your partner. Who read the acknowledgement. Yes, exactly. And so basically he said, why don't you just write as a hybrid? Because then you at least have 3 journal papers that are ready to submit at least at the end of your PhD. And so, and that's exactly the perception that I always, or at least what I tell my PhD student nowadays. So I always say, a traditional thesis, it's great, but a hybrid thesis allows you to be like fully immersed into that research process because you're really writing research articles. And some of the time, like my current PhD student who is finishing up in February, he actually has, 3 papers from a PhD published, and then 3 other papers in his PhD thesis that are not published. So it's kind of like a hybrid, like there is 3 papers that are published, 3 papers that are not, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant strategy that you employ for yourself and then advocating for your students. So I did something a little bit similar to you, but for different reasons. So I have dyslexia. So in my head, the thought of writing 150, 200 pages of work and keeping all of that simultaneously in my brain was not possible. But I could write a paper, and I'd written about 8 or something by that point. So I'm like, all right, cool. I'm going to write 3 papers, submit it as a thesis, get my PhD. And it worked really well for me. And now I'm advocating that as well to some of my students for the same reason. Like they were finding writing a thesis, they don't have the same issues that I do, but they found it quite overwhelming. And so if they could focus on paragraph by paragraph, building a short introduction, short literature review, and writing a paper that was quality over quantity, much more manageable. And I think your other point there about you being job ready at the end of it is so much better, right? So you're going to walk out of your PhD potentially with 3. I think you just said your PhD student has 3 papers already published. You're going to get into that, you're going to make past the desk rejection when you apply for those level B lecturer positions or something like that. So yeah, I'd be thrilled if I was your PhD student at the moment, because you're setting them up, from what I can tell, for success. And that's just my hybrid, a humble opinion. So with while you're doing your honors and your PhD, I think one thing that I learned from what I've seen is you weren't just sitting back and solely focusing on just being a PhD student, right? From what I can tell, that's not how you kind of viewed yourself. You did a whole lot of other things. So you were a research assistant at the Queensland University of Technology. Yes. I'm not exactly quite sure what that involves, but I love the fact that you just didn't focus all your time on one area. Did you want to provide us with some insights there?
Yes, I think my LinkedIn profile and my CV will be a self-incriminating evidence of me not focusing too much on my PhD. My PhD supervisor might get me in trouble nowadays.
Well, it obviously worked, so I'm not sure it can get you into trouble.
So during my PhD, I actually held quite a few, I would say, casual job, and basically, I was actually looking at my PhD and I was going, okay, well, I'm making good progress. I really want teaching experience. So I was looking for teaching experience. And then I was also going, I wanted to do more research outside of my PhD. So I was also looking for RA or research assistant work. And so one of them was Queensland University of Technology. I actually did some work, or more so literature review work, on management. So looking at stress. So something very similar to what I probably have done a little bit, indirectly from physiological response, because when you're looking at physiological response or psychophysiological response, stress is definitely a literature that you will delve into, stress and arousal. So basically, they were looking at more so not the physiological side of things, but more so how stress in workplace pans out, how does individual differences affects arousal tendency and stress tendency at work, or at certain high stress environments, so on and so forth. And they needed a research assistant to write a lit review. And being, I guess, a fresh grad PhD student, you go, oh, not PhD, fresh grad honors student doing a PhD. You go, yes, I am happy to be paid. Nowadays our RA probably get paid much more. I definitely pay much more than what I get as an RA now. So at that time, I remember it was something around, like, with the casual rate, it was like $35 an hour. And so in comparison to, when you're a bachelor student, when you're working in McDonald's or restaurant and you're only getting paid 25 or 22 sometimes, and, you have some dodgy Asian restaurant that may pay you $10 an hour. 35 is quite a lot. So at that time, I pretty much didn't even consider. I just took the job. But it was probably the first RA experience for me, and that then opened me up to kind of a world of actually, it's interesting because when you're doing research, you tend to be very narrow-minded. Like you only focus on your discipline and your area, your topic, your literature. But then these RA work with different researcher, especially in different field, take you away from those literature and open you up to this literature. And then now you can start to see similarity and differences in the literature, not only from a technical side of things like methodology, how they write, so on and so forth, but actually the theory. So sometimes I actually borrow, my PhD theory and actually put it into my RA work, and they go, that's actually quite an interesting perspective. Tell me more, Billy. And I go, oh, well, in psychology or in, social psychology or consumer psychology, these are the theory. And that could apply to health, so on and so forth. And that's how I got probably more involved in RA work. So I was an RA in QT. I think I finished that. Then I got an RA job in Griffith in nursing and health, and also an RA job in business school and psychology school in UQ as well.
Oh, they all kind of fed into each other, like one opportunity led to the other?
I would say yes. To be honest, it was actually the QT experience that opened it up, and then I applied for Griffith, and luckily enough, I got the job. I stayed there for the rest of my PhD. In fact, I stayed there 6 months after my PhD, helping them out. And then what happened was, while I was at Griffith, some other casual research assistant job came up in UQ, and I picked that up as well. And obviously, any PhD students, they will be given, teaching experience as well. So I took up some tutoring kind of experience as well in UQ.
Yeah. So I did see some stuff around that, like sessional staff was kind of like your tutoring role, I'd imagine. How did that kind of work for you? Did you start with a certain course and then move around others, or were you like, or were you teaching marketing or were you teaching psychology?
No, so I was actually teaching psychology. So as a psychology undergrad and then honors and then enrolled in a PhD in psychology, they generally, they were more open for me to teach psychology. So just like any tutors, or I would say 60-70% of the tutors, you always get the first year when you first tutor. Because why? Because they throw you to the deep end, right? The first year students are the students that, they just graduated from high school. It's large classes. They have a lot of questions, and also in some sense, it's kind of like, well, you're a PhD student, so you should be able to teach first year psychology. It's general psychology, like what is emotion and what is behavioral theory, and and all this kind of thing. So I actually started off teaching first year psychology, but from the second semester started teaching, I actually taught cognitive psychology. I have taught actually quite a number of psychology unit, at that time. Just like any PhD students, even here in Australia nowadays, we always look for work experience because of the salary. We only get, a small amount of stipend for our PhD scholarship. But basically, I took on quite a number of it. So I have done like statistics. So basically, every psychology students will actually do a statistical or research course at least once every year, if not once every semester. So I've taught, I think, the third year statistics, the second year statistics in psychology, first year psychology, as I said, behavioral psychology, cognitive psychology. And I think there probably are a few other units that I have probably helped out with, but I probably have forgotten.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. So you have when you were in that role, you had a very big breadth of what you're actually teaching. Like you taught a lot. I guess the easy thing to do would be, I'll just get scales of economy. I'll teach something. I'll absolutely nail it. And then I'll just keep chipping away at that because the money will be the same. Yes. And then, less bang for more buck, which is kind of good, or the same buck. But yeah, you had that sort of breadth approach. Was that a deliberate strategy, do you think?
I would say, thinking back, it actually really benefited me, and it benefits my teaching, like my preparation skills, and also kind of the delivery and how I manage the teaching environment or the learning environment. It really helped me a lot because with different unit, you have different year group, and with different year group, you have to have different expectation, and they have different expectation, and they have different styles that will engage them, so on and so forth. So it was actually quite interesting. But you're right. At that time, it wasn't a strategy. It was just whatever unit I can grab onto, I'll grab onto it. But then you're right in the sense that actually towards my third or fourth year, second and third year, and also 3.5 years around, even when I finished my PhD, I was, I think, still teaching for one more semester before I went to my full-time academic job. So at those times, at least for the 1.5 years, I actually really focused on a research unit, a research and statistical psychology unit. I have no idea what the name is. It's definitely not statistics and research, but it is a statistical and research course. And I started focusing on it, and because I've taught that for I think 2 semesters, I'm probably actually, as you know, casual tutors changes quite often, and I was actually the more senior tutor, and I was actually asked to be kind of the lead tutor. So basically, the tutor that helps with other more junior tutors or tutors who have just started teaching this unit to kind of get used to it and kind of become a deputy unit coordinator. But obviously in university, we can't call ourselves unit coordinator or deputy unit coordinator because of actual legal purposes, actually. But it is kind of like a deputy role of a unit coordinator. And so I was managing tutorials. So it became a lead tutor for that unit, really happy. I still remember who I taught for. I actually met her and when I visited UQ, I think about 4 months ago. It's actually quite interesting to see people how they have turned out after 5-6 years of not having seen them.
Yeah. So I think you said the first course that you were tutoring was like a big undergraduate psychology course. I'm guessing hundreds of students, like you said, first semesters quite often, right? Fresh face out of high school. Was that like a core course, or it wasn't just psych-based students? Like you'd have people from other disciplines who were just like, I have to do this because it's part of my like accreditation, I guess, or my program?
So it was the core psychology unit. So that's the intro to psychology kind of unit. So it's similar to the intro to marketing that we have.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to think. Is it alike?
So it was, from my memory, I remember it was something around 800 to 900 students in total. Wow. The tutorials that I manage is normally 30 to 32 students. The maximum, I think, at that time, you could only allow 35. So the biggest group you will have would be 35. But yeah, so it will be intro to psychology unit where you kind of learn everything, like everyday psychology, the flash blindness effect where, people passing the ball and you have to actually count how many passes is there. And suddenly in the middle of the video, a really weird gorilla comes in and you actually show that, if you're focusing on other things, even something come up, you actually have inattention blindness towards it. So we were teaching all these phenomena. It was actually a fun unit to teach because when it's like intro to marketing, right? When people go, these are the consumer behavior phenomenon, these are the tricks that you can play on people. And we're doing all these type of cool tricks to engage them, like the inattention blindness. We also did the fake hand effect where, if you look at a fake hand being stroked and you're being stroked objectively on the same time, you actually take psychological ownership of the fake hand. And so if I hit the fake hand, you actually report or subjectively report some of pain. And you go, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think it seems very similar, right? So I teach marketing 101. So it's marketing principles, trading and exchange. Similar over the year. I think it's like 700 to 800 students a year. But I think one of the things I actually really like is, you get the people who are enrolled in a marketing degree, but then you get people from sports and rec, you get people from psychology, people from podiatry. And what I love about it is, rather than seeing it as like a burden being like, oh, these people aren't interested, it's how can I get them to understand the marketers that they'll end up working with? And how can marketers understand their perspective as well? So I kind of see it as a nice way of giving them all the same terminology to work from, to understand why these people are aiming for certain strategies in the business that doesn't necessarily like, I'm a podiatrist. What do I care about marketing? Well, you kind of need to understand what they're doing in the business. So I find it all, or the accountants, right? Why are they asking for more money to spend on this media budget? Like, surely I'm just going to scrap that, explaining to them why they're going to be asking you for money and explain the logic behind how they get to that figure is, I think, pretty cool.
That's true.
Yeah, and so you've obviously done something quite similar. I think what's really kind of cool. So obviously you were based at University of Queensland, but in Brisbane there's naturally a whole host of different universities. We've only got 3 in South Australia, and 2 of them, it's almost a certainty will become one. By the time this podcast is released, it's almost going to be legislated by the state government, no doubt. We have both parties in our state now agreeing to it, Liberal and Labor. So 99.9% likely it's going ahead now.
Yes.
Yeah. So that seemed to give you a lot of opportunities working in a state that had multiple universities, just from an outsider's perspective. That seemed to be quite something you benefited from.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So I think what was really interesting is, you see this term on people's academic CVs, and you see it sometimes in media articles or whatever, adjunct research fellow or adjunct. There's some sort of connection there with the university. Did you just want to explain to, I guess me, I have a general sense, but maybe everyone else, what that kind of means, what it entails? How did you kind of get that position, those sorts of things?
I'm an adjunct research fellow in the Menzies Health Institute at Griffith University, and that was largely because of the work that I have done during my PhD as a research assistant, then a senior research assistant, and kind of like a project manager at the same institute with Professor Wendy Moyle there. We were actually doing work that totally is not even relevant to what I do right now and what I was doing in my PhD. We were doing testing robotics on people with dementia. So, and also technology usage with people with dementia and alternative treatments, so on and so forth. what's interesting is how I end up with an adjunct research fellow. So an adjunct research fellow is generally an affiliation. When we call adjunct affiliation, that means that is this a affiliation that is recognized, or it's a kind of like a recognized association for affiliation for an individual, but that are not compensated in any way. So they're not compensated in salary, so on and so forth. And so generally adjunct research fellow or adjunct professors, so on and so forth, they are basically just given a role that is, or an affiliation that is, or a position that is, I guess, aligns with their skill sets. So at that time, when I finish off my PhD and I moved to Curtin Mental Health Institute, and Professor Wendy Moyle was really generous in the sense that, hey, Billy, do you want to be an adjunct research fellow? That means at Griffith, you are recognized as a research fellow, which is the next step after your PhD. But this is an unpaid role. So you have access to, Griffith library, Griffith system. You could even have, if you do work on site on Griffith, you can have access to, swipe card access, so on and so forth. Generally entails, giving you office space, and basically they're given to people that are, I guess, in close collaboration and partnership with a research team. So that's how I kind of got the adjunct research fellow kind of position in Griffith. I still keep it because we actually still do quite a bit of work. So now I bring the more unique kind of side, like I'm bringing the multidisciplinary kind of dimension where I'm going, hey, look, people with dementia are also consumers or can be consumers. Here are some of the consumer side of things, ways in which we conduct consumer surveys. So for instance, in nursing and health, they are very much, paper and pencil. So they will go into like a hospital or a care facility and do data collection. Whereas for us, I go, well, we could actually do consumer panels. You could recruit people with, that diagnosed with early dementia, although it's a very hard to reach population in consumer panels, but you could. Or aging population, that is an easier to reach consumer panel. And I think they really benefit, or they really appreciate kind of that skill set that I bring along. And also because of a lot of the work that we have been doing, I was actually a part of a NHMRC funded project when I was at Griffith. There was also other, grant project that I was on. And so for the continuity of those work and kind of that research capability, I got that adjunct research fellow. And lucky enough, I still get recognized for the adjunct research fellow position right now, because it's funny, because I always go back to Wendy. I say, Wendy, I'm not actually doing much apart from maybe publishing 1 or 2 papers, maybe jumping on a call every now and then, and maybe presenting once remotely every year. Is that enough? And she always say, no, that's actually more than enough in comparison to other adjunct research fellows.
So are you co-supervising with students there, or?
No, so because they are in the nursing school, so they're very focused on, there is really the clinical nursing stream. There is that kind of people with dementia kind of nursing perspective as well. And still there's PhD students that are doing like computer science in those centers. But in some sense, no, I'm not co-supervising at all with Griffith University.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that you're not like salaried to the Griffith University, or in particular that center. Is there any financial benefit there at all? Like, do you get professional development funds if you do publish with their name, or do they, given you're in Western Australia and they're in Queensland, do they fly you over to help, with training or any of the other things that you just mentioned? Do they do anything like that?
No, so generally adjunct positions most of the time would not have any of even those financial incentive. So it's really a researcher going, or a researcher in a different institute going, okay, well, my research workload, I'm allocated to a research workload. Part of it, I'm going to contribute it to this other entity or other research team that I collaborate often with. And so I accept that as the adjunct research fellow
Hmm. So I guess, does that mean there are other secondary benefits then if it's not primarily through financial or resource-based? And what I mean by that, is it a good thing to have on your CV or your LinkedIn to say, I'm an adjunct research fellow at, this university, and this university is globally recognized? I think it's a wonderful thing. And so I'm just trying to scope out the pros and cons of it, I suppose.
Yes, so definitely. So in the academia world, adjunct position, especially adjunct research fellowship and adjunct professorship, are extremely highly regarded, or they have at least an esteem factor on it. In some sense, it also shows that you are valued by another university, and that your skill set is, I guess, appreciated by another university or research entity. And so I think more so the adjunct positions are really esteem-based, and that's why I'm also quite appreciative. So I got it when I finished my PhD, and I still have it. And so a lot of the time, a lot of professors, a lot of researchers would like to get an adjunct position, but it does actually requires someone in that research organization to say, yes, I can attest that to that, Billy, if he was here at Griffith, he is able to contribute to that level, and therefore we'll provide him an adjunct research fellowship or adjunct professorship.
Oh, okay. That's making a lot more sense to me now. That's like, it's like an esteemed position, somewhat prestigious, and an acknowledgement of your peers. It's like almost like an independent, very verified, very public association with you that then, does your own university in Curtin, do they value that you are externally, do they value this?
That is a good question, but in some sense, I would say they will value it because of accreditation. As you probably know, most business school goes through accreditation process. So in the accreditation process, one of the questions is how many staff demonstrate the esteem factor of your staff, and basically these are the things that they will list. Well, we have one staff that is an adjunct research fellow in Griffith University, another one in Harvard University, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's some great insight. So, I mean, given the fact that the university can then say, we have Billy, and Billy is valued externally through this, adjunct research fellow position. Does that then help with your promotion applications? Because, you've been promoted from PhD all the way through to, professor in what I think is a remarkably short amount of time. So I'm just wondering if this is one of the key things that you're like, did this help you in your journey, do you think?
To be honest, whether it's a key factor, I wouldn't say so. Would it be one of the driving factors? Possibly, because you could really say, hey, look, my skill sets and my value is recognized by another research institution, and it is kind of like a peer review kind of process. Like that's another university in Australia that actually recognizes that. So it does have I guess a influence, but I wouldn't say that it's a make or break for a promotional document, because there are professors where they have a long list of adjunct positions, and sometimes it could be 15 or 20 of them, and you sometimes question like, oh, so what do you actually do in all of these 20 research institution, and more so it's just because this person might spend 3 or 4 days a year, and that's how normally it's organized, because you're in very good collaboration or very close collaboration. You sometimes spend 3 or 4 days or even a week or 2 weeks at that research institution every year. So it is much easier it is an esteem to be recognized in that way, but also it is easier logistically and operationally to have you as an adjunct, so that you don't have to, swipe people in to the office, so on and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, whenever we have visitors here, it's a logistical nightmare. That's for sure. So you do quite a lot outside of your own university, which is obviously Curtin because it's on your shirt. Although those of you it's the most of us who listen on audio, so you're part of what's known as the ANZMAC Executive Committee. Some people, I have spoken about the ANSMAC conference on the podcast before, but for those who haven't listened to the podcast before, it's generally you'd be in a much better position to provide an overview for the conference. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I hope I don't get in trouble for mis-explaining NSMAC. But NSMAC, I think, just to get my acronym right, it should be Australian and New Zealand Marketing Academy. So the NSMAC, basically, it's the peak association for marketing academics in Australia and New Zealand. Generally, we actually nowadays have membership around the world, generally in the Pacific. So Australia and New Zealand is definitely our main base, since we are NSMAC, Australia and New Zealand Marketing Academy. We have our annual conference generally in Australia or New Zealand. So 2 years in Australia, and then the next year will be in New Zealand. So this year it is in New Zealand, Otago. Next year it will be in Tasmania, so on and so forth. So really what NSMAC really stands for is really a association that is for marketing academics. So academics that are in the business school, generally teaching marketing or management, a kind of an association or peak body that represents them. And we basically organize a conference, and also we also have our own journal. So the AMJ, or Australasian Marketing Journal, which is our NSMAC's journal. And so basically we manage that, and we provide, I guess, support and advocacy for marketing academics in the Greater Pacific region.
Yeah, so I think it's been around for quite a while. Do you know how many of those conferences you've been to?
I think I have been to every single one of them since 2013, apart from maybe one or two.
Yeah,
it's funny because I remember there was an NSMAC in Griffith University a long time ago. I think 2015, and I actually missed that one.
Oh no!
It's actually my hometown. Yes.
I guess it's less exciting when it's in your own state, though, isn't it?
Yes, I think I actually sneaked in, and I think I jumped into one session, and I didn't register, so I better leave.
Yeah, fair enough. So my first one was in Western Australia, funnily enough, in 2011. Yeah. And then we kind of got one per degree that we did. So I did honours, and then I went once during my masters. So I missed the Griffiths one because I think that was during my off year for masters. I was lucky enough to get funding for 2 of my PhD, and then I think I've been to every one except for the ones that were basically disrupted for COVID, and we couldn't fly into Melbourne. But yeah, I really enjoy it. I think it's a great conference. I mean, the best part about conferences are the networking and seeing people. And I'm sure you would attest to, when you keep going year on year out, you keep seeing the same people, and it's so nice to catch up with them and hear about their family and their life and their career and build collaborations and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm a big fan of NSMAC.
Definitely.
So how long have you been? So you've obviously a big advocate of the conference. So you've joined the executive board. Did you want to run us through that process about how you went from member to thinking, I'm going to try to give back and be part of the executive committee?
Yeah, so the executive members are basically the members that are elected by other members to kind of run NSMAC. So I think it was my memory is a bit murky here. Probably 2018, I think. 2018, 2019, every year, every elected member can serve a 3-year term, and they are the policy or the constitution of NSMAC stipulate that they can be re-elected after 3 years for another term. So the maximum serving term continuously is 6 years if you get elected twice. So basically, pretty much every 1 or 2 years, there would be a space in the executive member that comes up. Now, in 2018, 2019, I'm already, I think, in the NSMAC community for a while. So I started off when I was second year of PhD. I actually noticed that, look, there is quite a few things that I think as a marketing discipline or from a marketing academic perspective, there could be things that we could do to better support, academics. Especially at that time, I was possibly, I think, a senior lecturer. And so as an ECR, you have that drive, you have that passion to go, okay, I'm going to make a difference. And, we're ECR and we need to, better support the PhD students, better support the ECR, better support, the transition from doing an honors for marketing to either a Master by Research or MPhil or PhD. And also, I don't know if we were going to cover this, but, as a ECR, it is a very tough period, your research career. Whereby you're pretty much expected to be a Superman or Superwoman, to be a great teacher, a great researcher, and still give back to your discipline, your university, and your discipline as a whole. Mm-hmm. And so at that time, I had that passion of going, okay, well, NSMAC is an advocacy group and a peak body of marketing academics. So I'm going to put up my hand and see if anyone votes for me to go in. At that time, I was, I don't think a lot of people knows me, but luckily enough, a lot of members actually saw my kind of statement and they maybe have resonated with it and voted for me. And so I got voted in. And so it is a very transparent and independent kind of election process. So you have to nominate yourself or someone have to nominate you. You have to write a statement. That statement gets passed around through electronically to all the members. Every member have a vote and there's an independent voting system. They vote for whoever they select or they prefer. And the one with the highest vote, win the election. For the upcoming round, I think we have 2 or 3 spaces, and there's a stipulation. So basically, you can't have more than one academic from the same institution. So if I am a member or executive member at Curtin University, no other staff or full-time staff in Curtin University can go into the executive members, just so that we have a representation of pretty much different perspective. So that's the executive member in NSMAC.
Yeah, I'm very well aware of the no dual member policy. Thanks, Lara. No, I'm very happy for Lara. She works super hard and definitely is going to represent everyone.
A big shout out to Zac, who pretty much is the man behind our social media platform. And we definitely need to have a big shout out to Zac, because Zac's posts are on point and definitely keeping all the social media engagement for the whole NSMAC community. We're getting quite a lot of likes and shares.
Awesome. Thanks heaps, Billy. Yeah, I'd love to see that. Actually, I'll be there at your executive meeting, or not the executive one, but the general meeting in December. So I'm keen to see how those stats have actually performed year on year. So yeah, thank you for that. I really, really appreciate the acknowledgement. So you're part of the big communications team, as you alluded to there, and just one of your brackets must be social media. What other parts of the communication, all the newsletters and stuff, is that under your umbrella with obviously Paul Harrigan from UWA and Lara Stocky? I think it's the 3 of you guys who are the communications core, right?
Yes. So within NSMAC, it's actually quite interesting. So although we get assigned, or we actually pick our own as to which subcommittee you want to go into. So obviously I put up my hand for the communication, which kind of we are actually more so looking at the web, taking care of the website, and then the social media, and I guess the communication with internal members. But the newsletter is actually done by the president, so Linda. So yes, so basically that's actually doesn't fall into our portfolio. However, yes, when you're in something like NSMAC, especially when you're an executive member, you can see that most executive member has put up their hand for other subcommittees. So for instance, I'm in the strategy subcommittee, which looks at, what are some of the strategy for push forward NSMAC or the marketing discipline or marketing academic discipline. I help a little bit with conference also where I could, so on and so forth. So it's really the executive members are actually a very collegial kind of community. And, it's really, as you know, Zac, academics during semester, they're probably busy teaching trying to balance research and then this whole administrative kind of burden of, from a university. And then you also, if you're in NSPAC, you also have NSPAC. And so sometimes we cover for each other. So for instance, we know that someone, couldn't do a particular administrative work for NSPAC. Whoever that is free will probably put up their hand and say, hey, look, I'm free for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Let me have a go at it, and then I'll draft something up before we go in and finalize it together, so on and so forth.
Oh, that's really, really nice to hear. So you can do 2 stints of 3 years, almost like a president of the United States, where you can't get reelected more than twice. Pretty cool constitutional thing there. So does that mean then do you have opportunities to become like vice president like Paul or president like Linda, or are they currently serving during their 3 years or their 6 years, I suppose?
From my memory, so I am actually serving my 6 years. I think Paul is also serving his 6 years. So basically, once you're elected as a executive member, then the executive member will actually meet. So generally we meet, nowadays we generally meet on average once every 2 to 3 months. But we also have our annual, like the big annual meeting. And so when you get elected, you would go into that year's, it always coincide with the conference where we get everyone together in the executive team, and we'll actually discuss who will be the treasury, who is the vice president and president, and secretary. Because the president and secretary have the signatory role, the treasury has the finance signatory role with the secretary, so on and so forth. So basically, we'll need to either nominate ourselves or nominate others, and basically do a voting. So we basically normally we have, I think, from my memory, I remember it's 10 to 12 executive members. So currently, I think we have 9 from my memory. Yes.
Oh, okay. So it's voted within the people that we've voted, and it's voted by the other executive members within. Okay, cool. See, I like learning all of these things. I think it's really fascinating. So as I alluded to a little bit earlier, one of the fascinating things, and to me, actually, the insanely impressive thing is you went from, PhD and into lecturer, and it was just like bam, bam, bam. I think it was like 2 years, 2 years, 2 years or something like that. Next minute, Professor, Professor Billy. What made you stand out in that sense? And how did you transition so quickly? Because I think that's one of the quickest successions I've ever seen. So I'm trying to learn, obviously, and everyone else from your success.
I'm not sure if I'm the case study that you want to learn from.
Well, 2 years is insane, so I think so.
Well, to be very honest, I've been asked this question quite a lot, and I always have. I guess that my answer to that is actually why I got promoted so quickly is actually not an individual effort. I run a team called the Consumer Research Lab at Curtin University. Really kudos to them. So if you really look at my track record, I am in the past 3 or 4 years, I'm averaging around 15 to 16 papers. I think this year is about 18 to 20 already. Now, if you think about this, we call it a balanced portfolio, right? So we have 40% of my workload dedicated to teaching. So going to classes and teach. 40% is on research, so doing research. 20% is on service and leadership. That is basically the roles, the services and administrative role that you do in university. So like I'm a director of research currently in the School of Management Marketing, so that falls into service and leadership. So technically, in a 5-day work week, I have about 40%, so 2 days doing research. Now, you would expect a researcher doing 2 days of research, you would never have one person publishing 18 to 20 papers.
Is this a year?
Yes, in a year.
Okay.
So it is impossible. And so basically how I manage this type of workload or, this type of trajectory is that I have a team, and I firmly still believe in this. And I learned this from one of my academic mentor and one of a professor that I aspire to be. Very early on, I wouldn't say very early on, I think when it was 3 years into my academic life, which is about 2019, he tells me, Billy, you can only do as much as a person. you have built yourself as a capability. Now you have to start considering building capability around you. So don't build capability within you, like you have enough capability right now. Build the capability around you. So what he means is that, capability and capacity comes hand in hand. And so basically you need to build a team that is capable enough to be able to support you so that you can do other things. And also you have to have a team that is capable and have the capacity to push you to the next level. Instead of, stop operating at this level. You have to think about how do you push yourself in the next level. And one way to do it is to increase your capacity and capability. But there is always a limit on capacity. And so now if you start building capability around you, you can actually use them to leverage on them in some sense to push you to the next platform. But in that case, you have to and this is something that he told me and I totally agree with and I always aspire to, is that in that case, you also need to make sure that you are actually building the right capability for them. Because if you're not building the right capability for them, they will never be able to support you to go on to the next level. So you can actually see my consumer research lab. We started, in 2016. I still remember it was a one-man show, which is myself. We then had an RA. Now we pretty much have about 12 to 13 research assistant, or I call them research specialists or senior research specialists or project managers. Soon enough, we'll have a research fellow. We have a few project manager. Now we have a co-lab managing kind of arrangement, so on and so forth. And all of these people are actually the big shout out of my track record. I will never be able to be teaching 2 days a week, researching 2 days a week, and actually doing service role for 1 day a week, and actually have all these track record, all these awards, all these teaching award, research award, research publication, teaching innovations. It takes time to update content every single semester, especially when I teach digital marketing. You need people that is passionate about their work, that that you care for them, and that you're building their capability, and they know that they're working on a purpose. That consumer research lab, we are interested in understanding consumer through using consumer biometrics and neuroscience technology, and also innovative tools. And that is basically what we're aspiring to. We want to do the best research as possible, have the best research ethics as possible, and actually aspire to become, I guess, a center that everyone is proud of. And to be honest, I would say 80% of why I got promoted so quickly through the academic ladder is because I got the right person. They have stayed with us for a long time. They themselves have grown a lot. So I have 3 people in my lab currently. One of them just, I think 6 months ago or 12 months ago, have left the lab to another role in another university. These 3 people that I'm referring to, they started 5 years ago with me. They all of them, I could put my hand on heart. All of them have developed so much. One of them have 11 papers in 5 years. Yeah. One of them, and that's not even including PhD. One of them has, recently this year alone 6 A-star. So that really attests to, I guess, and that's where I go, well, that's also why I think I am quite proud of my team, because I always tell them when I get a promotion, when I get an award, I always say, this award, yes, it says Billy Sung, but it actually should say Consumer Research Lab.
Yeah. Wow. Very humble, definitely. But I can totally see where you're coming from. I think I'd sort of say that, I think it's great that you're sort of sharing that credit, but obviously you have tremendous leadership skills there that you've obviously learned from potentially a mentor at some point. That's really good insights, and it's kind of changed the way I'm thinking about things, which is, I guess, the whole point, right? I want people to learn from what you've done, and it seems that what you've done is, like you said, building the capabilities of the people around you and building a really sort of solid research team. 15 papers a year is nothing to be trifled at. I think my max is 5. I thought that was a very good year. Our KPIs at UniSA are 1 A or A star paper every year on average for 3 years. So you could have 3 in 1 year and then none in the other 2 and you're still okay. So, just 15 times the KPI, I can kind of see why that would stand out quite a lot. So very, very impressive. And just speaking about your whole sort of research agenda. So I think my favorite source to look at people's publications is actually Google Scholar. I think ORCIDs are wonderful and they're very good at tracking people's research. But I think Web of Science and Scopus have obviously their own little houses, and Google Scholar gets the more, higher levels of citation because they kind of house both of them. So I usually use Google Scholar. And so, you have quite an impressive citations there, over 1,500. I don't like citations as a sole metric. I quite like the H-index as well, which is 26. So that shows people that, it's not just Billy and his team hasn't just had one paper that's been astronomically successful, but you've had a breadth of paper that's all had an impact. So that's why I like the H-index as well. What I'd like to talk about, though, is we've spoken a lot about your research. So in terms of your research stream moving along, so perhaps we can just talk about one of your more recent articles, if that's okay.
Yes.
Cool. So I think the one that sort of stood out to me, because I think it'd be pretty interesting to everyone, it's called Task Types Effect on Attitudes Towards Voice Assistants. And it's published in the International Journal of Consumer Studies in 2023. And I think the reason that this would be interesting is because, those voice assistants are things that we all kind of deal with, like, hey Siri, or, oh no, my phone's about to go off. No, it didn't. Phew. Or what's the Google? Oh, you say, hey Google, right? So we're all dealing with all of this. So you probably, I know you pump out a lot in terms of your research. Do you remember how this study started?
Yeah, so as I think before we recorded, as I said, I vaguely remember this being pre-COVID, to be honest. And there was a reason why I now remember it's pre-COVID. I will tell you why. Basically, and why is that the case? And for those who are, listening that are not really familiar with academia, the work that we publish mostly reflects works that are, 2 or 3 years ago. Why is that the case? Because we will do the work and it takes maybe 6 months, and then it takes us maybe 4 or 5 months to write up the journal article. We submit it to a journal. Normally, in marketing, I would say, I don't know if you agree, Zac, the turnaround time for the whole review process with revise and resubmit. So reviewer can say, I like it, but I want you to revise this and this and this, or I really don't like it and you have to revise it this way, or I totally reject it. If it's in one journal review process, let's say 2 rounds of revision, maybe the fastest, I would say 10 months, 12 months.
Yeah.
You agree? Yeah. So in some sense, that's when you're lucky, right? When you submit it to a journal, the editor likes it. So it gets sent to 2 reviewers, or sometimes 3 or 4 reviewers. And all of them give comments and suggestion. Some of them can say, no, I really hate this paper. This paper is totally worthless. You shouldn't be submitted. Like literally, I have gotten those comments before. No theoretical implication, blah, blah, blah. But let's say, on a taking an average perspective, generally, the first journal will be a journal that you target to be quite high and that you just want to try and see if it works. Generally, it takes 6 months for it to be rejected or major revision. Let's say you go to another journal, it will take another 6 months for the first round of revision, or maybe if you're lucky, 2 rounds of revision. They could also knock you back down after 2 rounds. So after, you work on it for 12 months with revision comments twice already, they go, actually, you know what? No. And so generally it takes, 12 to 18 months for a paper to be submitted and then published. And then it takes another 6 months for the publication house to finally put it online or finally publish it. Nowadays, we have online first, which is easier. So generally it takes, 2 or 3 years. So why I remember this starting off with pre-COVID is because we actually planned to use Psychophys on this paper. but we weren't able to because it was in the midst of COVID and we couldn't test. We couldn't bring people in to test. So the general idea of the paper was, okay, we know that voice assistant, so we're casting our mind back to like 2019, where voice assistants started to be emerging. So there is, Siri, there's Google, so on and so forth. We don't have ChatGPT yet. We have no idea what Gen AI was, but Gen AI was there, to be honest, all along. And basically, these voice assistants is starting to go into our daily life. And the question that I had with my collaborators, so Unju from US and my current PhD student and soon to be research fellow Patrick, was that how do consumer actually see these voice assistants? And so we did some literature review and we go, okay, well, it's interesting because there are some few papers that talks about voice assistant in the business and marketing and consumer perspective, but most of them are in computer science and the IS perspective. Okay. And they have been saying, you know what, they have to be human-like. Because if they don't respond like a human, you always think you're responding to an AI, and therefore you should actually have human-like AI or voice assistant. Now here is where I go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, because when I was in Griffith University doing robotic research, there is what we call the uncanny valley, whereby whenever a robotic is too similar to a human, people actually dislike it because there's a creepy kind of feeling towards really human-like robotics. Like there is a Japanese one that really does look like a humanoid robot that looks like a human, and everyone gets creeped out by it. And so we know for a long time, uncanny valley is in the robotic industry, in the literature. We know in the computer-human interaction literature, there's always uncanny valley. So why is voice assistant different? Like, how come voice is different that you need to be human-like? And so we go, we actually want to challenge that. We actually want to know whether this is the case. And so what we actually plan to do was we would do, so as I said, I like multi-experimental design. So I'm not really a structural equational modeling guy. So I don't really test this big, correlational, regressional model. I like to test experimental research with factorial design. So the idea was to do an experiment in the lab, then, on an online survey, then get them into the lab and actually hook them up with biometric responses to actually measure, these implicit attitudes and affects, and whether human likeness of the voice actually prompts you to go, oh, that's creepy. And soon enough, what we find is that COVID hit, and that paused the whole biometric testing, because biometric testing, you can do it online. There is some valid online biometric testing platform, not a lot, but technically that's the accuracy or precision drops quite quickly once you go online. So you always need to take people one by one, or at least one researcher with 3 participants into the lab and do biometric testing. So we couldn't do biometric testing. And that's why I remember now it's literally pre-COVID, because that was the plan. But on the first online survey, we actually went through, okay, we have the same prompt. So we basically say to the response and task is to actually say the prompt. So like, okay, Google, do this. Right. And it could be, and we go, okay, well, what could confound that? So if we look at the response to that, so the AI response or the voice assistant response, the consumer reacts to that, what could confound that? Well, what could confound that is the type of task, right? So I can say, okay, Google, turn on the lights. That's a very functional task. Okay, Google, I want to play a game. That's a very social task. Or, okay, Google, I love you is a very social prompt. Okay, Google, you're useless. It's kind of more functional in some sense, right? So we go, okay, well, that we need to control for that. So we either randomize it, we either eliminate it. So we can't randomize. Oh, well, we can randomize it, but we don't want to eliminate it. So in that case, we have to include it, right? So we basically go, okay, now let's go to Google data or like voice assistant data and look at what are some of the most common tasks that people actually do with voice assistant. And we've gone through and go, okay, well, There's some that is a lot more functional. There's a lot more social. There's a bit of neutral. And so what we did a pre-test, and we basically asked, instead of function task, and there's a social task. And so we had a list of them, and we go, okay, let's randomize it. Now, as you probably now can hear, that wasn't our sole purpose of the paper, but it was actually supposedly a randomization. So we're just trying to eliminate that as a possible confound. We just don't want that task effect to have an effect on how people respond to human-like voice assistant and non-human-like voice assistant. To give an example of a human-like assistant is basically like us talking, right? If you say, no, okay, Google, turn on the light. We'll get, we got a lady to actually record it for us. No worries. The bedroom light is turned on. So that's a human-like. Whereas the AI one or the robotic sounds like one, non-human-like one will be like, no worries. And then it has a very long pause. The bedroom light has turned on. Or the bedroom light has turned on. So it's quite, you can, as a human, know that's an AI and that's quite a human voice. And then we also pre-tested it so that we make sure that there's no just like, we between subjects. So there's no like pre-emphasis of I like human voice or I don't like this human voice. And, this lady sound unnatural and this lady sound natural. We have none of that. So we basically just keep it, to make sure that there's no other confound. And task effect was one. So we actually just go, okay, well, cool. We pilot tested. We are quite okay with the stimuli. Let's go ahead and do it. So it was actually a 2x2. So a human-like and non-human-like 2 times 2, which is social and functional tasks, experimental design. Mm-hmm. We soon realized that we thought that, yes, we hypothesized that might be a task effect, but we thought it would be an interactive effect. We soon realized that there is a big, like the effect size was something like 0.8 or something. I remember seeing it for the first time and I go, what is this functional task effect? And I already forgot about it. And I was like, what is this? Why do we have a functional task effect size of 0.8? That's big, effect size from 0 to 1. And basically we found that if it's an AI voice, there's a really, really significant and big effect on functional versus emotional tasks or social tasks, whereby people actually just prefer functional tasks. And so we go, well, that's actually quite interesting. And so then the paper actually acknowledges that, I think, in one of the methodology, and we said this is actually the greatest study, but we actually took part of this study because we actually found this, and then we added 2 more studies that really build onto this big effect. And basically what we go, okay, we hypothesize. So obviously as a scientist, the next thing you do is, why is that the case? because a lot of people goes, well, you need to have voice assistants that sounds like human because it's more social. Now we're finding that if you actually get people to mimic the interaction, like, okay, Google, do this. And then obviously it's an artificial one because it's an online survey. But we concealed it so that they thought that they were really interfacing it with on an online server through their computer with an AI. Like, okay, Google, turn on the light, and it responds. It basically is this a automatic. It just listens to you, and then when there's silence, it plays the audio, and so it kind of tricks the consumer. I hope Curtin Ethics doesn't hear this. Tricks the consumer to think that it is an AI, and we were actually expecting the totally different hypothesis, and we acknowledged that, right? So we basically said, well, previous literature actually says that human-like voice and social tasks should has a bigger positive effect on attitude. But we found that functional tasks has bigger attitude, and that is really contradictory to all these other literature that is saying social tasks is better, human-like voice is better, so on and so forth. And so we actually go, okay, well, why is that the case? Well, it comes back to our personal use case. If I hear AI voice, do I feel that they're more competent? Because AI is more competent in functional tasks, right? If you ask here if AI can actually just turn off the light, right? Or do a calculation. So some of the functional tasks could be, okay, Google, what is 126 times 126, right? Our hypothesis is that maybe simply hearing an AI voice on a functional task make you perceive or misperceive that this AI is actually more competent, because as a human, you can make a human mistake, but as an AI, you don't. And so it might be perceived competent. And this actually spills into perceived warmth, right? So we know from social psychology, and that's taking me back, and it actually picked a paper that really integrates a lot of my thinking from different life stage or career stage of my life. So in social psychology, we have this interpersonal theory, like really, really influential theory. Like anything interpersonal, you have to cite this theory, because basically what they say is when you're going into personal context, how you evaluate someone, whether you like the person, whether you will promote a person, whether you will hire a person, there's always a perception of competence and a perception of warmth. And competence is basically, do you have the ability to complete a job? Do you have capability? Warmth is kind of the social aspect. Are you friendly? Are you approachable? So on and so forth. And so now here's interesting, because we hypothesize that maybe it's perceived competence, but the literature keep on saying you have to increase perceived warmth. And they don't call it that way. They just keep on calling it, you need this human likeness or the social aspects, or to make sure that people actually feel like they're interacting with a real agent. So realism, but it's actually perceived warmth. And we go, okay, well, just like any marketing experimental design researcher, you go, well, let's look at the mediator first. What is the underlying psychological mechanism? So we put in perceived competence and perceived warmth as potential mediator in the second study, and we found that, we actually find an indirect effect whereby you prefer an AI on a functional AI voice on a functional task versus a social task, because you perceive the AI to have higher perceived competence, which in some sense doesn't really make sense, because it's the same voice and they're the same task, right? So, which is quite interesting now. So it's this because you misperceive it to be higher in competence, and therefore you're more likely to reuse that robot again, or you have a more positive attitude towards it. And that's kind of the second study. And what we then did was we actually looked at another follow-up study to actually look at whether we can replicate that whole effect that we found. And lo and behold, to be honest, when by the end of study 2, the effect size was still enormously large. You can kind of go, yeah, I'm pretty sure it will replicate. Like there's no other way that this cannot replicate. And so in study 3, we replicated with a different context and a different mediator, perceived ease of use, to actually look at, is it because it's moderated by perceived ease of use. So again, this is where the experimenter comes into play, right? So it's always demonstrate the main effect, then look at the mediator, and then find a moderator. And that's pretty much gives you a very solid, robust explanation as to what's going on. So we picked ease of use as a moderator, and we actually go, okay, well, if it's perceived competence, let's now prime people to feel that this is hard to use or easy to use. Because if it's hard to use, even if you see it as perceived competence, there shouldn't be an effect, because yes, it's competent, but it's hard to use, so I don't like it. Not functional tasks, right? Functional tasks shouldn't have an effect. And that's exactly what we found. So we not only replicated that people prefer an AI voice in a functional task because of perceived competence, and that leads to higher reuse intention and attitudes, but also that is moderated by ease of use. When the person is primed to feel that this task is very hard or this assistant is very hard to use, that whole effect that we just talked about disappeared. But if it's when it's an ease of use, high ease of use, so very easy to use, that effect remains. In fact, that effect strengthens. So this really tells you that in some sense, the literature say that, you have to have more human-like and social aspects to AI or voice assistant. Our findings actually shows that no, actually, people seems to prefer AI in functional tasks, and AI voice in functional tasks because they are perceived to be more competent in functional tasks. And that ease of use will moderate this, showing that it is really that perceived competence that's driving the effects. And so that's really the whole paper.
Wow. It's a great paper. So what I'll do for everyone who wants to read all of that in more detail is I'll put the DOI, a link into the show notes and everything like that for everyone. You've got there was quite a lot you covered over that 3 studies. And I think it's really interesting, those fascinating insights as to where you started, how you had to pivot due to external environmental factors, and then how study 2 and study 3, for me anyway, explaining why you then went about doing those was incredibly useful. Like you said, research can sometimes be a lag time of 1 to 3 years, depending on review cycles and all those sorts of things. Are you continuing to operate in this space? And if so, what's next? Or what would you like other people who are working in this space to do?
No, unfortunately, we do have one. Funny enough, we actually wrote 2 papers from this bigger project, 2 different sides of data collection. One really focuses, so this one is focuses on the task, and the other one focuses on the voice. It's interesting that it was supposed to be one project, and then because of the finding of the first study, we've pretty much broken it down to, okay, one focuses on voice and one focuses on task. So this task paper was actually submitted maybe 8 months before the voice one. Now, maybe the editor of this journal is going to kill me, but they actually got published at the same time. So they got accepted at nearly the same time, and they got published online first at the same time. And so it's actually quite funny because if you look at my track record now, there's 2 voice assistant paper side by side in 2023. But no, actually, we were planning to actually bring people back to the lab and actually do some physiological response because COVID have lifted, COVID restriction have lifted. And this is where I guess I always say, a lot of people say, tell me why, how did you become, a professor so quickly? And I go, I'm really not a very good case study, because one of my limitations I notice is that I have a very high curiosity and need for closure. Like if you ask me, right, whether I binge on Netflix, I'm not even binging anything I can binge on. Like even a game, if I start a game, I have to play it to the end. I can't stop until I end it. So, but that also means that after I end it, I go, yep, what's next? And so a lot of the time when I have a research, I'll go, I got the answer, and I go, okay, what's next? Yeah. So I'll get attracted to another research topic in a totally different realms, but I don't remember which one. But I literally, when we finish this research paper, or these 2 research paper, or these data collection, I go, oh, I know the answer already. And so in that case, we went on to something else. But I do some more work here in kind of perceived autonomy. So more so how you interact with AI and the decision-making process. So if human has the final say or the AI have the final say, if human have the first say or AI have the first say, so something like Netflix recommendation, it's AI have the first say. Whereas like an AI that help you do finance, you generally have the first say because you give the data to the AI, right? So we're looking at, the manipulation of that, but we're not really doing much with voice assistant anymore. To be honest, I think as business research goes and journal editor goes, why voice assistant was actually quite exciting for reviewers and editor was because that was the hot topic, because it's published in 2023, that will be 2 years ago, right? 2020, 2021, that will be the hot topic. Nowadays, I would say a lot of business researchers will pivot to generative AI. I actually haven't come up to the trend, but I gone to the trend and actually using generative AI to do commercialization projects. So instead of doing research on it, we're doing commercialization on it.
Very cool. Yeah, I have to admit, like you do have those trends and hot flows throughout the literature, and seeing papers still floating around. I guess arguably the butt end of COVID-19. There was journals were just flooded with them, and now whenever I see one, they still are kind of trickling in, and I think to myself, I wonder how many places have rejected this paper, because like we've all moved on in the literature, so I'm not so interested in reading it myself anymore.
I think I'm a accuser of that as well, because I actually have a COVID-19 vaccine Twitter paper, and even Twitter has changed its name to X. So I was like, no.
Yeah, Elon did it just to smite you. So you've spent heaps of time with us already, so I really do appreciate it. I have a few more questions, if that's okay, just to sort of round everything out. I like reading a little bit. I wish I had a little bit more time too, and especially a little bit more energy to do it after, like a long day and reading quite a bit during the normal work hours. But is there any books that you would sort of recommend, I guess in the marketing or potentially business, or actually probably for you in the psych realm, something that's maybe a little bit easily digestible for me and everyone else? Do you have any recommendations for that?
Am I obliged to say how brain grows?
No, we've had a few people say that. They've sort of already sort of prime you this whole time. I need to release a book, and then you can recommend that one.
Jokes aside, I did really enjoy How Brain Grows.
That's good.
It was actually quite a mind opener as well for me. That aside, I think one book that I would always recommend, I don't know if you have heard of it. Actually, it's a series. So Freakonomics.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So this is actually quite interesting. Freakonomics actually was my mandatory reading for a third year research, like contemporary psychology book. And you go, what? Kind of like a non-fictional book for third year psychology. I was, yes. So the UC actually asked us to read it. So we actually read Freakonomics, and I have read Freakonomics 3 times and Freakonomics 2 times. Basically, it follows how two economists applying econometrics and economic modeling to show very interesting phenomenon that you would not actually expect it, but it is not proven, because in research you can't prove things, but confidently say yes, that is the phenomenon and that is the cause. So something like a big one that has been replicated time and time again in different experimental design, natural experiment, and that started off from them, or the work from them, is that abortion in US has a direct effect on crime rates. And so their theory was that because if there is no abortion, you are getting babies born into these low SES and probably, let's say, have a higher tendency to have criminal activity, or have the higher temptation to have these criminal activity in their upbringing, and therefore that will actually affect juvenile and delinquency and crime rates of 15, 16, 18 years down the track. And they were able to use big data to actually prove that point in some sense. So proof as a quotation mark. And that's one of the chapters that they have in there. But they have all these different really interesting things. And it really highlights a lot of how I like to do my research. It's what we call, be brave in your hypothesis, but be meticulous in how you find the evidence. So I always like to go, I saw this, why is that the case? Let's make all the hypotheses, and then find a way to test those hypotheses and actually find the right hypothesis, or find one of the right hypotheses. And I really enjoyed that book. And why I recommend that book is it's not only just a mind opener, but also kind of that you can actually see how the author really are passionate about their research, and how they go about doing the research, and how they have, it's just clever, like things that they go, okay, what about if we want to look at, this crime rate in association with abortion rate, where can we find a natural experiment? Because you can't, right? Because there's no way you can just go, hey, local government, why don't you just not have abortion for the next 6 months and then have it again in the next 6 months? You can't do that. So what they did was they were actually looking at like pre and post abortion laws. There are states in US where they have it flipped on and off, whether there's abortion laws. And in fact, if they actually redo it right now in this particular moment, 1 or 2 years ago, we had this whole backflip on abortion in US. You probably would be able to find how that has an effect, 13, 14, 15 years down the track, and how they're thinking of going, okay, well, what are also the covariates that I need to control for? What are the confound factors that I need to control for in these natural experiments and how do I measure them? How do I get data to measure them so that I can feed it back into my economic model to show that, yes, there is really a effect and a strong effect. And so those two books really, really open up my mind to research.
Perfect. That's definitely on my to-do list now. Thank you. Some of the audience, so we have quite a wide range of audience now. So we have established academics like yourself. We have a lot of ECRs like myself. And a good chunk of the audience as well is undergraduates who are potentially coming through their bachelor's degree. And they're thinking to themselves, like, how am I going to get my first job, entering industry or continue with research? What would your advice be to these people who are probably at that point, 21, 22 years of their age? What would your advice be for them?
I would say, so as Zac, I am quite an industry-orientated academic. So we do quite a bit of work in industry. If an undergrad asks me what will be the tips, is attitude and aptitude. So that's generally the most essential trait that an industry person will look into when in an interview. Attitude and aptitude. Not just, obviously you have the skills, right? But do you really not need a training on the job? They would definitely train you on the job. If you go into an agency, if you go to client side, if you go to the even a marketing coordinator role, there is certain process and things and approaches on how they market and how they do marketing that they need to train you on. So that's a given. But attitude and aptitude is a totally different thing. So attitude and aptitude give you kind of that precursor of you can actually learn. You're willing to learn. And I think one thing that I will always tell undergraduate students to do is get as much industry experience as you could. Internship, either unpaid internship, paid internship, even, just running it for your friends, right? Like running a Google ad, running a Facebook ad, running an Instagram ad campaign, and see how it goes, right? Well, there's no Instagram ad because it's under Facebook, but running these type of things and going, okay, how does it work, right? And have that practical industry experience. Like casting my mind back, I don't teach undergraduate, but I teach the postgraduates. But most of my very successful graduates, one of which I won't mention her name, but she graduated, I think, 4 years ago. She is now the strategy director in one of the most prestigious marketing agency in Perth. And 4 years. I bet with her when she graduated. I said, she was my master by research student. I said, this person's name, and I said, you will do good things. You'll do great things in the marketing industry. If you continue that way. And how did I predict that? Well, attitude and aptitude, because she was willing to learn. She was willing to put in the hard yard. She was willing to actually be humble, right? Because look, I always tell undergraduate students in like marketing competition where they pitch to clients and I'm a judge, and I go, in real life, you don't really run a social media competition. Or, in real life, did you consider the budget? In real life, do you really want to rebrand? Talking about how brand grows, right? Like a lot of undergraduate student thinks that, when I graduate, I go to an agency, I can finally design, one of the biggest marketing campaign, and I'll be very creative. I'll rebrand, I'll repackage the product, and you go, hold your horses. Practically, that's not feasible financially and logistically. And from a marketing theory perspective, that's totally wrong. Like, don't rebrand.
Yes.
If you don't rebrand, that is always why Madonna has never rebranded. Like, they still keep to there's the custodian of the brand. You can't rebrand Madonna. You can tweak the branding, but you can't rebrand Madonna.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a paper under review at the moment with one of my PhD students, or he's graduated now, but on exactly that. So I've had an absolute ball chatting to you for the last couple of hours. One thing that I usually try to end on, because I think it's quite a nice thing to do, and I learned exceptionally large amounts from this last part, which is, do you have like a last piece of advice that you would have for our listeners? Maybe it could be a favorite quote of yours, something you live by, a philosophy, or maybe some advice someone had given you. Is there anything you kind of want to leave us on that you would like to share?
Oh, you put me on the spot here.
Would I?
Would it be something more so personally, like life-wise or career-wise or marketing-wise?
Could be career, either way.
From a marketing perspective, I mean, I don't know whether it is a motto that I stand by. And it's a word that is overused, right? Data-driven and insight-driven decision-making. I built as a scientist and a researcher and an industry consultant as well. I truly believe that, decision-making can be much better, especially high-value decision, like which television, how do you produce your television commercial? How do you rebrand, right? If you really do rebrand, use insight and data to justify every single high-value decisions and inform your high-value decision. That's probably the marketing career side of things. Personal side of things, I'm not too sure. I guess just be nice to people. I think, and I think I can say from an academic perspective, Zac, you would know. I don't know if you would admit. I would definitely admit, because I'm a professor now. Being nice to people and being academic and being nice to people around you makes a lot of difference. Academics are not, sometimes not the most approachable people in this world, I would say. And I'm an academic, so I can say this.
Absolutely. I think that's a pretty good way to end it. Everyone, we need to be nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Billy. I've really appreciated everything you've shared with us today. I've learned a hell of a lot, as I'm sure everyone else has. But yeah, thank you so much for spending your time with us.
Thank you, Zac. It was very enjoyable, and really appreciate the opportunity to be on your platform.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hey guys, it's Zac Anesbury here with just a couple of quick reminders. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, then make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. There are plenty more interviews to come with some of the world's leading marketing academics and practitioners. You do not want to miss these. In the meantime, if you're looking for another way to connect, then follow me on Twitter at Zac Anesbury. That is ZACANESBURY for my take on the marketing issues of the day.
That was the Zac Anesbury Show.